So continuing my series going over budget weapon builds that are around 200,000, we have a weapon that I think may be one of my favorites in Arena Breakout Infinite, even though it's not necessarily the best meta weapon, but when it comes to budget weapons, it's surprisingly good. And if you know how to use it and the strengths of using it, it is ridiculously strong, a lot more so than I think a lot of people realize, and this is going to be the FAL. And make sure to subscribe for tons of videos on Arena Breakout Infinite and other upcoming extraction shooters. Now, one of the biggest strengths of the FAL is that it's a 7.62 by 5.1 caliber rifle, which just means it's going to be hitting a lot harder. And we can directly compare this to the G3 budget build I went over previously, where the G3 uses the same caliber, but the G3 has significantly lower rate of fire. The FAL has 630 RPM, which is pretty good for this caliber of round. And keep in mind, the build we're going over is around 200,000, but there's a few unique parts of this. First off, this is using a 50 rounder. It does have a silencer, and a bit of a unique thing with this build, since this is a weapon that can be used at longer ranges and hits much harder, and is something that actually has some recoil you have to control. I'm also using a much more expensive sight, the 1x6x, which is significantly more expensive than a lot of other sights, and sights are really expensive this season. So if we go and take a look at the price of this build, right now at a really weird time, it's 220. You can get this at 200,000, and keep in mind, literally half the price of this weapon is that scope. So if you want to massively reduce the price of this build, you can use a different sight. If you just want to use like a hollow sight or something like that, you can use that. But I've just really been liking using the 1x6x on this, and you can still get it for 200,000 again if you're playing at a more normal time. But going into the rest of the parts, like I mentioned, we are using a 50 rounder. These are a bit more expensive. You could go with 30 rounders if you really wanted to. I think it's actually much more viable in a weapon like this. Just get one 50 rounder and like one 30 rounder, and you're generally good to go as well. The build is still overall really cheap. Then we're using the FAL comfortable rear grip. Then on that, we're using the FAL triangle stock. It's actually pretty nice. The stock is really good for the price compared to a lot of stocks of other weapons, which usually ends up being one of the most expensive parts. Then we have the FAL sight mount receiver cover, which is what we put our sight on. And again, you can use whatever sight you want to use. Then for our handguard, we're using the FAL quad rail extended handguard. On that, we have our front grip. We're using the vertical front grip, which is just probably the best price to performance for any grip. Another really good option is the RK6 front grip. Has one less horizontal recoil, but is usually a little bit cheaper, but they're generally pretty similar. Then we are going to be using the dedicated FAL extended barrel. This also does increase the firing power of this weapon, and I'm not sure exactly how firing power is calculated, but generally extended barrels are better unless you're like in close quarters and butting up against walls or something. And then on that barrel, we have the MK14/M14 suppressor. And that is going to be the entirety of the build. Again, the strengths in this weapon lie with the high RPM and the caliber, but it only has 56 vertical recoil and 54 horizontal recoil. And the ergo can be a little bit low with the 50 rounder, but that's generally fine. So you can't really full spray this weapon at like medium or longer ranges. You can tap people from longer ranges, and at close range, this destroys absolutely everything. So if you're like in close quarters with other people, this weapon's just going to destroy and be up there with like any other meta weapon. But that brings us to our ammo. You're never going to be using the white ammo. Then you have BPZ at like 600 to 700 round. This is tier 3 penning with 67 base damage, which is really high. Really good initial muzzle velocity. So again, you can use this at longer ranges. 32 pen, 14 armor damage. A pretty good tier 3 penning round. But I would actually recommend you use M80 with this build. You can get this 16 to 1800 usually per round, which is actually not bad for tier 4 penning. And it has 63 base damage, 833 initial muzzle velocity, so you can still use it at really long ranges, 42 pen, 21 armor damage, a very good round. You can very much still fight tier 5 armored people, but like most other tier 4 rounds, if you're facing tier 6 armored people, you're really just gonna have to break their armor to be able to go against that. M80 rounds are very good, and even though this is a higher RPM weapon, if you're actually hitting somebody and they're not in tier 6, you're gonna kill them pretty quickly. So I would really just recommend you use M80 with this weapon. This weapon and this build is kind of made to bring you into at least being in lockdown mode. You can still use it in the highest difficulty as well, but going into lockdown, having this around 200,000 price weapon, using M80 is going to be very good. So you can still go against the tier 5 armored players in lockdown. So I definitely recommend getting yourself some M80 with this build. But that's the entirety of this build, and this has become one of my favorite budget weapons. It's actually a really fun weapon to use. Some of that fun comes from having a weapon that isn't just a laser beam. Some of the other budget weapons I've gone over are legitimately just laser beams, and the budget of them usually comes down to like sights and lower mags and having a little bit less recoil, but a lot of them still don't have super high recoil. This is one of those weapons that you actually have to control, but it's much harder hitting, which is what I've really been liking. And because of the price of this build, it just allows me to use a 1x6x that again is like half the price of this build. The sight's just really nice, but I do like using the variable longer zoom sights, and I think it just works really well with this build in general. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.